Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we are joined by a very special guest, Mr. Jake Tuura. Jake is an S&C coach from the States who's got a lot of experience in hypertrophy, vertical jumps, and patella tendon rehab. In this episode, we get into the weeds to learn about the various stages of tendon rehab and how to simplify your structured return to sport. Some cool takeaways in terms of protocols and some interesting tidbits about tendon physiology. So stay tuned. But before we get into it, don't forget to click the link in the description box below to register your interest and get Lunge and Lift listener exclusive bonuses for the strength formula, your answer to the strength and muscle building equation. A quick thank you to our show sponsors, as always, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check out the website to get the 3 vital principles of movement mechanics free guide. Also, thank you to wit-fitness.com. Use our discount code LL15 to get 15% off your kit. And also Hydro, use our discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Right, let's get into it. Jake, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming. How are you today?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Very well, thanks. Very well. Yeah. So you're over in Chicago at the moment doing some research on tendons.
Yeah, I mean it's like back and forth. Like I'll spend. I'm kind of like an anti-Huberman guy, so all these routines that he puts out and supplementation and everything. I've always been a contrarian, so I want to go against the grain. So it's like I could have a day where I'll probably spend, I don't know, at this point, 8 hours of like really focused, really get a lot of stuff done, and then the next day I don't want to do anything, so I don't do anything. Nice. I really connect with the artist types when I hear about the creative process. Like, I don't know if you guys have heard of Rick Rubin. Yep. Rick Rubin's like that music producer. Yeah, so I listen to all his podcasts, and he's a guy I really resonate with. So, the tendon, doing a lot of research on tendons, reading textbooks, reading every piece of research I can get my hands on, and trying to understand it the best that I can so that I can release a course to simplify it for others. And, because for me, my patellar tendon has ruined my life multiple times, and I figured out how to get over it. So I just want to go deeper into the research, and actually, I figured out how to heal it without knowing that much. I'm just curious to know more, but you probably don't need to know that much. It's like good loading, good exercise. But if you are really curious, like myself, then you can go super deep into the subject.
Brilliant. And sorry, I should have given you an opportunity to introduce yourself. So can you tell us, like, I guess the patella tendon is going to be a big part of your story, but what are you doing now and how did you get here?
Yeah. So I kind of think I have 3 things. People probably tell you should have one, as you progress in any career field, that you should kind of have one thing, like one niche. And for myself, it's kind of been 3 things. It's kind of been muscle gain for athletes, because I was like, how do I get big without getting slow? And then I was like vertical jump, because I loved basketball. I was wanted to dunk. And then it was patellar tendon. And all of those for me were just kind of given to me because I was always really weak and tiny, and it ruins your self-esteem. So I was like, I want to put on hypertrophy. So I figured out how to put on hypertrophy. And then I'm like, okay, well, that kind of makes you not very useful in a sport, because you just get 40 pounds of muscle and you move like a block of wood. So how can you do that without kind of the negatives? So I figured that out. And then vertical jump training, man, it just takes years. If you don't have it genetically, it takes years of jumping. And then the patellar tendon was given to me by having jumper's knee for like two years in my first case. So anyways, I started out just a strength coach, kind of a generalist, wanting to work with anyone. And I did the high school, worked high school for a bit, Division III college, Division II college, Division I college. And I think 2 years into Division I college, I lost the love for it. I just completely lost the love for it. Like, I don't have any interest, maybe in a one-on-one case, but I don't have any interest in training people anymore. I don't have any love for it. I used to. That's all that I cared about is training people. That's why I woke up in the morning. I'm gonna go train these athletes, make them more explosive, make them better at their sports. I loved it, and now I don't love it anymore. So that's gone. But so that was kind of what I did, and then I was able to turn it into an online business for the things that I have personally been able to overcome, which is add hypertrophy for an athlete, vertical jump, and then knee pain, patellar tendon pain. So that's kind of me. Those are my three things.
Wow. And how did you lose the love? That's curious to hear that.
I think I lost a love, and actually, it probably was the setting of college strength and conditioning. Um, I bet if it was a situation where I had more free reign, I
Mm.
had more control. But you go to college, you go to college strength, and I had like 110 athletes. I'm working with like women's swim, and I'm working with women's golf, soccer, a bunch of different sports. And I realized I'm a basketball guy. I like
Mm.
basketball. That's
Yeah.
it. I don't care. I don't care really to train anyone else. Um, so then you're dealing with coaches that might not agree with you, assistant coaches, other strength coaches who are critical of you, athletic trainers, team doctors, and then the athlete's opinion, the 18-year-old athlete's opinion of what you're doing, and you got 40 of them. So yeah, for me, initially it was like a battle that I wanted to go into, and I was like interested in, they say like developing relationships, teaching them why you do this and that, and I did that for a while, and then kind of towards the end, I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't really
Mm.
care to uh, develop relationships or what. I don't care to. So I'm like, but I think for looking at it, for anyone that could actually admit that, another coach could look at that negatively, be like, well, that's a
Mm.
negative trait. But I'm like, yeah, that probably is a negative trait for me as a coach. But it also has its flip side positive, which is that I'm able to research something like a patellar tendon to a level that this other coach that cares about the relationships is not going to
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Wow. Um, cool. Okay. Yeah, I think that gives it some good context. So, in the chronology, I guess you wanted to get big first, then you wanted to get a great vertical jump next, and that led to the patella tendonitis, which led to the expertise there. So, could you just walk us through that journey? Like, how did you go about getting big? Then, how did you go about getting your vertical jump? And how did
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
the tendon?
Um, and I think I'm lucky because like I was very small, but I grew. I think I have good genetics for size, good genetics because you have some people that lift weights and then just put on muscle, and that kind of happened for me. I've seen a lot of my friends who lifted weights and they didn't put on muscle, but
Mm.
I kind of looked at lifestyle too. That these guys were partying on weekends or they weren't eating enough food, and for me, I grew up in the middle of the woods. There was nothing to do. There's nothing at all to do. So it's like once I got weights, it's like I'm gonna lift. I'm gonna lift all the time, and so, dude, it was actually I think I was lucky that I started before like the Instagram, TikTok, Twitter world, or whatever. Started
Mm.
before that because I think I trained for like 7 years before I said a word online, before I said anything. And I see people nowadays. I have friends nowadays who have been lifting for a month and they're ready to put out content, and I'm like, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
knock it. I'm not gonna knock it, but I think there are some issues with that. Where I'm like, you really, it's gonna come. Well, it's gonna come across in your content that you are not that knowledgeable or you don't have that much experience because the way that people talk about things, this experience comes through. But so I basically just trained for like years. And actually, initially, it wasn't for hypertrophy. Initially, it was for basketball. It was for vertical jump. I initially trained for vertical jump, so I bought Tim Grover's like that jump program with
Mm.
Michael Jordan. I did that. I did like every jump program, and it I got patellar tendinopathy from that. I did one. I did one. It was called like the 40-inch blueprint. It was some guy in Australia, and it was just tons of plyos. It was hardly any lifting, and I got my first dunk after that summer, and then I had jumper's knee for like 3 years after that. So I trained for vertical jump for basketball, and I got jumper's knee, and then I kind of decided, well, screw this, I'm just going to get big. So then I just lifted weights for like 2 3 years and just got really big, and that actually helped my patellar tendon because I gave it. I think the big part of the rehab process of patellar tendon is, first of all, you don't want to do anything. You want to make sure you're loading and doing something, but you want to stop pissing it off. And I love,
Mm.
I think Enda King is in Ireland. He said, you got to stop poking the bear. And I love that phrase,
Mm.
stop poking the bear. Because that's what a basketball player will do. A basketball player, patellar tendon hurts, they take a little bit of rest, and they go back to basketball, and it blows
Yeah.
up again. You poke the bear, you poke the bear, you poke the bear. And it's like, if you could not poke the bear, the tendon healing process, which might take months or might take years for you to lay down new collagen and get a bigger tendon, that can actually run its course. But if you keep pissing it off, that's probably not going to happen. You get an inflammatory response every time you're doing it. So for me, I had the bad patellar tendon pain, and it was not getting better for 3 years. And then I just quit playing and I quit jumping and I just lifted weights. So I wasn't poking the bear at all. And I think I spent 2 years just lifting. And then coming out of that, my patellar tendon pain was gone. But then I had to learn, okay, and now I want to jump again. And I started jumping. And what do I do if I say I want to jump again? I go jump every day. So I go try to dunk every day.
Yeah.
And then my patellar tendon blows up because it's like now you change the high stress loading. So it was learning about that. And then my vertical jump was already decent anyways, but then it was just getting the transferring all that strength I gained into that, and then learning how to deal with the patellar tendon pain. And then I thought I was over the patellar tendon pain after the lifting, and then it's like it came up again on my left side. I never had it on my left side. Then it comes up again on my right side, and it's like I've just dealt with it off and on. And each time it kind of actually seems like there's a different reason why. Like initially it could have been, I think initially it was a certain event where I had a little cut and I felt kind of a pop in my patellar tendon. So maybe like a very partial tear. And then I think it was changes in load. And then I think it was, one of them might've been body weight or metabolic health, because I was like, it was COVID and I wasn't doing I was just like gained some body fat, and I was still jumping a lot. There's probably more load on the tendon, but also the tendons are pretty sensitive to just being metabolically unhealthy. So I think that was something that was going on at one of those times. And it's just come up off and on, and I've just kind of been lucky. I'm like, and that's why I think that's why I'm still into it, because it's like I put up a meme one time of that movie Gladiator, where he was like, death waits for every man or whatever, and I was like, patellar tendinopathy waits for every man. Oh man, can do a smile back, because it's like, I'm not gonna say I'm bulletproof and I don't have knee pain anymore. It's like I could go do 100 jumps on a concrete court, and I bet you I'm gonna have knee pain the next day. Nobody's bulletproof. It can always come up again. And the case with patellar tendon pain, it usually just doesn't come up in people's lives, because I'm 31. People usually just stop jumping at 31. They stop playing sport at 31. So they get Achilles tendon pain or something else. They don't get the patellar tendon pain later in life. But so the hypertrophy for myself, I'm like, I figured it out. I have enough size. I'm good. I don't care to get any bigger. Vertical jump, I just need to get better at dunking. That's it. And then patellar tendon pain, I don't care about it unless it comes up again. And then my research side is more just like, I think it's just been given to me that I'm really into the tendons right now. And I bet you in 1 year, we might have a talk and I might have no interest in tendons. So I just hope that this course is done by then, so I can move on.
When you was going through your muscle gaining phase, what did you have the intention of obviously coming back to more like the jumping stuff, or was it you was taking the time out and just really had no thought of what was next and you were just focusing on the muscle building time?
Yeah, no, I had no interest in. I gave up. I gave up on basketball and jumping. And I think I had a hard time. I had a hard time going into muscle building, because when I first started lifting, I would always look at guys in the gym doing bicep curls or something. I'd be like, dude, you're an idiot. That's not making you better at your sport. Like, how's a bicep curl make you better at sport? Just because I was at very specific jump training, and I was like, I'm never gonna be a muscle guy, lifting for muscle. So, but there was this guy back in the day, John Kiefer. I don't know if you guys ever heard of John Kiefer. Yeah. He did car backloading.
I know the name.
Yeah,
that's why I know the name, car backloading.
Yeah, car backloading. And when I was in college, I found Kiefer, and I think we all have people that we resonate with really well, and that's why we'll listen to their message. Their message can be, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. It's just that you see something that you resonate with and you're like, that's right. But really, it's like you just really connect with the guy. So Kiefer, I loved. He was the guy that I probably resonated with the most, because he talked about athletic performance, muscle gain, shedding body fat, gaining crazy amounts of muscle. The way he marketed was just great. And he had a workout program. It was called Shockwave once, and so I was doing car backloading a little bit. I was still training for like kind of function and whatever. And then I went in one day, did an upper body workout. I think I had like rice, a bunch of white rice the day prior. And I got this massive pump in my upper body. This was like when I was 20 years old. I had never experienced a pump before in my life. And I was like, dude, this is crazy. So in that moment, I'm just like, now I'm going to do bodybuilding. Or like, I didn't compete in bodybuilding, but like, I'm going to do bodybuilding and I'm just going to do powerlifting. And I think it's the way that my life has went, where I was really into bodybuilding and powerlifting, and looked at all the top guys and read everything that I could. But that only lasted for like 5 years. And then after 5 years, I'm like, I'm done with this. I don't really care. I kind of look at it like, sure, maybe I copped out or gave up early, but I'm like, I think I accomplished what I wanted to accomplish in this area, and now I'm bored. I'm going to move on to the next thing, So and for me, I think the dunking came back in when I had done some. I had done actually Cal Diet's triphasic during the powerlifting and bodybuilding thing. I had read triphasic, and then I did a little block of, I think, eccentric training. And then I just went out on the basketball court with my friends, grabbed the basketball, and just stood underneath and did a two-hand dunk. And it was like, where did this come from?
Yeah.
Like I could never do this before. And I actually think at the time that I could do a standing two-hand dunk. I bet you if I had ran into it and tried it, I wouldn't have got it. Because that's when you just do the stationary jumping, you're so good at stationary jumping. And then if you got to take any speed into it, you can't do it. And I think that was me at the time. And that's kind of been me for years. It's just me getting that practice of running into it and then jumping. But jumping in basketball just came back in because my knees felt better. And then I'm like, I kind of forgot that I love this. So I want to go play it, do it again.
That's awesome. And I guess for the listeners who aren't familiar with the nuance of tendons, what would you say is tendon 101? Like if we start at the very top, what is a tendon and what are the key properties of a tendon that make it so special and difficult to treat?
Man, difficult question. So first of all, I would say this first of all is, if you're not dealing with a tendon issue, then don't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It doesn't. Like muscle really runs the show. Muscle runs the show of everything. And I'm not saying to get a stronger, like that's very general. Let's get a stronger muscle or let's get a bigger muscle. I'm saying like muscle in the terms of when you're doing something in, let's take a sport of basketball. I just know basketball. You're playing defense, you're running, you're doing something fast, you're jumping. Is your muscle has to work by itself very good, and it has to work with other muscles very good, and it has to be very stiff. Like your muscle has moments where it has to be very stiff. Your muscle is controlled by your brain. Your muscle, I guess, can be controlled with faster processes. But why I say the muscle matters the most is because the tendon is only really going to respond to what the muscle's doing or what the bones are doing, because it's the middleman. And there's not much, like, you know how you can contract your muscle, squeeze your muscle? Like try to contract your tendon. You're not going to be able to just contract your tendon. It's not a contractile tissue. It's just a response to what's going on at the muscle or the bone. So usually when someone runs into a tendon issue, it's not really a tendon issue. It's like you probably have done some form of overload. The tendon is gonna take the pain, but the rehab process probably shouldn't really focus on the tendon. It should focus on the muscle, because you need to get the muscle to do its job again. I was just having this might not answer your question, but I'm just gonna say anyways. But I guess the main point I'm trying to make is you were saying what are the basics of tendon, and I'm kind of saying that it doesn't matter and you should look at muscle, because when you do get a tendon pain, your brain will, let's say it's your patellar tendon, your brain will shut down your quadriceps. So you can see your quadriceps get smaller and get weaker. You can test the strength, it'll be weaker. So you have these qualities of the muscle that just decline. They basically go away. So your quad muscle is no longer good at working at all in the most simple sense of a strength exercise. Think of how it's going to be working when you go back into sport. It's not going to work well at all. So what happens is you can still play sport. You can still jump high. I think you're just going to be yanking on the tendon more. Your muscle's not doing its job, so it's going to go down to, I guess maybe you could say, the next link, which would be the tendon. And the tendon has kind of a length to it. It's just like a contractile tissue, so it just pulls apart and then it comes back. It pulls apart, it comes back. It's called strain. So the elongation of the tendon, and it can only elongate so much before you start breaking the fibrils, because one of the ideas is you have fibrils, collagen fibrils, one of the smaller components of tendon that would run from the quadriceps all the way to the tibia, and you'd have depends on how small the fiber is looking at. You'd have millions of these guys. So you'd have millions of these collagen fibrils running from your quadriceps to your tibia, and they have a certain length that they can go to. If you go too far, then you're going to rupture the fibril. And if you could rupture all the fibrils, and you get a rupture of the tendon. But the idea I'm thinking of is when you get tendon pain, the muscle shuts down. The muscle's not doing its job. The muscle is weaker. The muscle's smaller. It's probably, I could be wrong. I would think the muscle would then be working like kind of more shortened as a protective mechanism. The muscle would just be chronically like a little bit shortened, and that's going to be pulling on the tendon. So everything you do, you're pulling on the tendon more. Think of all of those fibrils and how you can stretch them out. Now you're stretching them out more and more and more, and you're probably going to get more fracture of the fibrils because you have a tendon pain and you didn't rehab your muscle. So you need to rehab your muscle, which I would look at a tendon rehab process, would just be like, okay, you got tendon pain. Let's look at the muscle that's associated. If it's the Achilles, it could be the calf. If it's the patellar tendon, it could be the quads. Everything matters, though. All the muscles matter. But then you can just start and say, let's not poke the bear. Let's start with something that isn't going to provoke it. Isometrics. It's usually just isometrics. Great way to load the area, load the muscle without poking the bear, without causing pain. And then once you're good with isometrics, you make some gains. You can go on to slow strength. Same thing, slow strength. You're just getting some full range of motion. So now the tendon is actually getting strain and then kind of relaxing, strain and relaxing. So maybe you're getting some changes at the tendon there. And then you slowly progress back into the type of movements where you need your muscle to have intramuscular coordination and muscular stiffness, and just progress that. So I don't know if that answered your question at all, but it's kind of this idea where I'm looking at tendon. People like, let's do XYZ for tendon. And I'm like, anytime you do anything for tendon, it is probably doing more for your muscle than it is for your tendon. That's what I think, at least. Because there's never a time where you can just do tendon training and not muscle training. Now I've had this thought. Let's confuse your listeners even more. Because I read this. I think it was by Greg Lehman. He's a guy on Twitter. I love his because he's so critical of everything. But he was talking about stretching. He's talking about stretching. And if you look at tendon, you say tendon is stupid, dumb as a rock. All it does is respond to is loading. All it is responding to a stretch. So couldn't you just get into a deep stretch? Wouldn't that be training the tendon too? That's the idea, because you're getting strain in the tendon. And I read that. And I'm like, dude, that is interesting. Could you say you're trying to train your patellar tendon? Could you just get into like a very deep squat? Or could you get into a couch stretch? If you're doing a couch stretch and you're stretching the life out of your quadricep muscle, you're also getting adaptation of your tendon. But there was a study. It was a frog. I don't know why they can't do a lot of these things in different subjects. They can do it on a frog. But so they tried. I think it was their semitendinosis or one of their hamstring muscles, and it was a passive stretch, and they had stretched. They looked at the strain, so the elongation of the muscle and the tendon, based on this passive stretch. And what they find, which makes common sense, is the muscle is stretchier than the tendon. So if you put a passive load through it, what's going to stretch? The muscle is going to stretch. The muscle's not activated. When you do activate the muscle, now the muscle locks up and it actually pulls on the tendon. So it's when you get this muscular activation in a position like that now you're going to get a strain on the tendon. But if the muscle is just chilling out, now the muscle is going to stretch and your tendon is not going to experience so much strain. So it's kind of a thought I had where I was like, could you just do a stretch? But it's like, I don't think you could do a stretch because your muscle is going to make up for it. So it made me look at, because I have a lot of people that do ATG, Ben Patrick's knees of our toes thing. They try his system for patellar tendon. His system is great. It's going to work for people. You're loading your knees. You're going. A lot of these people going from sitting on the couch to loading. Amazing. It's a great thing. But a lot of kids do the program, or a lot of kids reach out to me, or I see a lot of testimonials of people trying it for their patellar tendon. And sure, you feel better doing the backward slide walks than doing the ATG split squats, whatever. But dude, I look at it and I'm like, nothing here is really stressing your patellar tendon that much. Think of how much load your patellar tendon gets when you jump. When you do a max effort jump, you're yanking the life out of that thing. So if you do no training to yank on your patellar tendon, because you're doing a backward sled and you're doing ATG split squats by shoving your knee forward, which is not yanking on your tendon, because you're yanking on your muscle, not your tendon, because it's super light loaded. You would yank on your tendon more if you did a super heavy split squat that was more of a shortened range. But a lot of kids can't progress back. They can't progress back to jumping. They feel better with the training, but they can't progress back to jumping. So I look at it and I'm like, okay, that stuff's amazing early on, but I think you have to get to some super heavy training. I think you have to get to some very heavy training where your quadriceps is working as hard as possible in a position, and that is going to get the load through the tendon. That's going to make the tendon actually strain. And then you can progress into jumping, landing, those type of things, instead of just going what most basketball guys do, and what I've did for a decade, do nothing for a few months and then go 100%. And it's like, oh, my tendon hurts again. And it's like, well, you think your tendon hurts, your muscle, you haven't done anything for your muscle in the last 2 months, and now you went back and your muscle's doing like 10% of its work, and you're putting all this load through the tendon, you're stretching the life out of the tendon. It's like, oh, my tendon hurts again. It's like, well, you think you should have rehabbed the thing. I don't know. Hopefully all that makes sense. I'm still trying to make sense of it myself.
No, it does. It makes great sense. I think it's a hard concept to get your head around when we're so focused and obsessed with training muscles, and it kind of, we're always thinking of weight, reps, sets, but there's different qualities that we need to focus on for the tendon. And I love that explanation of putting tension through it with a stiff muscle. And I think that you can easily visualize that going on in a plyometric, because muscles aren't changing length very much when you're doing some bounding or pogos or whatever it is. The calf kind of stays a fixed length, and you can see the Achilles is going to have to take the load there. Do you have any practical advice for how to progress through that loading system? Because if you're doing isometrics, is it as simple as duration and load through the isometric? Because you've got that muscle component as well. It's a little, you're kind of working two things at the same time. How do you know what proportion is tendinous, what proportion is muscular?
Yeah. It is, dude. And here's the problem. It's like, I talk about tendon, and it's like, okay, muscle, we're trying, most of it should be muscle. Sure, you're always going to get tendon, but like most of the focus should be muscle. But then you have all these different phrases, man. You have like stress shielding, stress relaxation, tendon creep. And then someone could make a whole training method for like, we're doing this for stress relaxation. But it's like, well, dude, what about the other 30 terms that are going on? What about those? But I kind of look at it. I actually, maybe kind of how to simplify this for a person out there is, I look at everything, the entire rehab process, or everything you're doing for a tendon, is it needs to be based off of pain, and it needs to be based off of function. That's how you progress. So first of all, pain during training, excruciating pain, do not do it. You never want excruciating pain. You can deal with a little bit of pain and discomfort during training, because you might actually need that for a tendon. And probably because you got to get enough load on your quad, if it's your patellar tendon, get enough load on your quadriceps and your patellar tendon. You need to get enough load, and if it is so sensitive that you can't really get load through it, it's like you're probably going to be lifting like 10 pounds on leg extension. And I don't think that's enough to strengthen your quad and your tendon. The benefit is your tendon will warm up. So I've done it where I get in with a super tender patellar tendon. I'm lifting 10 pounds on a leg extension for 30 seconds, and my quad's shaking, and I'm like, and my other leg, my healthy leg's doing 150 pounds. It's like, what's going on here? But I give it 2, 3, 4 sets, and I'm pretty much comparable, because my tendon warms up, because it kind of likes that loading. It's not very painful. But so I base everything off pain and function, and I'm like, you want pain to kind of be acceptable, pain to be stable, and that's kind of where you introduce your loading. So if we talk about isometrics, I think there's kind of two ways to go about it, because somebody could come in with a awful tendon and try heavy isometrics, because Jill Cook said heavy isometrics, tendons love heavy isometrics. But I'm like, well, sometimes they don't. Sometimes it makes it way worse. So you come in, and you could take it like gingerly, take it easy, and just do a thing where you do an isometric where you feel your quadriceps working, and then wake up the next day and be like, okay, do I feel better or do I feel worse? Do I feel the same? And if you have no increase in pain, then you can increase the weight. But that's not what most people do. Most people go, and it's like, day one, isometrics are good for tendon. Let me go heavy as possible. They try it, and then their pain might blow up the next day, because you're still think about it. You're still straining the tendon. You could say it's low patellar tendon load, but you're elongating those fibrils, and some of them probably can't handle it. Some of them are probably damaged. So you might need to start a little bit lighter. But anyways, I just do the Keith Barr thing of 3 to 5 sets, 30 to 45 seconds. It gives you a load where you can lift a pretty heavy load for your quadriceps muscle. But then you get the side benefit is you would get the stress relaxation with your tendon, which that type of research, I think it was done in like a petri dish. I don't really exactly know how it was done. Probably in a few years we'll look at it and be more critical and be like, well, this is maybe not what's happening in a human, but it's like you have that the tendon kind of relaxing. The idea is that the dude, and actually, I don't even really know what's going on. I don't know what's going on because you think of the fibrils and they just go end to end, and I guess some of them break and they branch off and they do. But if we just think of them end to end, and you hold an isometric, just think about this: you hold a heavy isometric, the fibrils are straining. They're only going to strain linear. What else is going on? And that's where this research by Hazel screen on the interfascicular matrix, because you have fibrils which are bundled into fascicles, and I couldn't find for the life of me how many fascicles you have in a tendon. I couldn't find any research on this. I found it in a mouse. I found it in mice. In a mouse tail, they said a mouse tail had 1 to 11 fascicles. And why I say the fascicles matter is because the fascicles have all the collagen in them, but the fascicles can actually slide and rotate between one another. So you're not actually getting load through the fibrils or through the collagen when the fascicles can actually slide and rotate, and that can cause the changes in the entire tendon length. So you can get loading through your tendon without stressing your collagen. So I'm looking at the Keith Barr stuff, and I'm like, if you're doing an isometric, are the changes happening in the interfascicular matrix, but with the fluid around the fascicles, or are the changes actually occurring to the fascicles themselves? I guess I don't really know the answer, but go back to earlier in this talk when I'm like, I'm going pretty deep in the tendons, but for me to get better, I didn't need that. So I'm looking at it, I'm like, do people need to know the exact reason, the exact mechanism why? No, they just want the result. And the result is, if you do 3 to 5 sets, 30 to 45 second isometric with a decent load that you tolerate well, your tendon's probably going to feel better. And that's probably a good way to introduce some loading into your tendon. But yeah, there's so much stuff out there in tendons, and so much of it seems contradictory to me. So I kind of just ignore it. Even earlier, let's just go off on every tangent in the world here. I was looking at the tendon. I said the tendon is not contractile. But I was reading this book from like the 80s, and they said they found some actin and myosin filaments in the tendon. And I'm like, oh man, now I'm just going to ignore this. I'm just going to ignore this piece of it because I'm like, I thought tendon didn't do any contracting itself. Because I guess you do have some innervation, but I'm like, is it that type of pain? Is it pain innervation? Is it like the Golgi tendon organ innervation? Is it innervation actually get actin and myosin to contract? It's like, dude, this thing is just a mess. And but go back to this, like to get someone results for tendon pain, it kind of takes some just common sense ideas. It's just interesting to me to go deeper and be like, is this why this is happening? Or is this the reason why it's happening? Or is this one of the 1,000 and I don't know the other 999 reasons why this is happening?
So yeah, you've touched on, like, obviously with the Ben Patrick stuff, kind of getting people to kind of some kind of baseline, and then they're wanting to get to the jump stage after that. And you mentioned obviously in between is the heavy training. So obviously we've discussed isometrics and stuff. What other things would you tend to recommend? I know we kind of touched on this, but what are other like KPIs that you can work on that are going to get us back to the core or whatever type of plyometric work you want to get back into?
Yeah, and actually I wouldn't even. You said it's kind of like a middle ground, the heavy lifting. I would actually like. If you need lighter stuff early on blood flow for a very sensitive tendon, sure. But you need to progress the isometric stage to super heavy, and then you need to be lifting weights super heavy, and then you need to progress the store and release ability. So where is the place for super light loading in tendon rehab? I mean, go ahead, do it. It's probably good for like muscular endurance or whatever, but I'm like, what is that doing for your tendon? I don't really think it's doing much. Yeah, unless you could take this, unless you took every single set to failure, because now you think the muscle is getting shorter and shorter and it's going to be straining the tendon more as you hit failure. But do you really want to go and train every set to failure with like 20 or 50 reps? That's not very fun. So yeah, I kind of look at it. I'm like, how does someone get back into jumping? So say, yeah, someone has a super painful patellar tendon. They want to go do that blood flow stuff because you feel better. But I look at it and I'm like, you could feel better with whatever. I could have a super sensitive patellar tendon, and I could say I'm going to go play basketball, and if I just jog around and get some shots up for 20 minutes, I feel better. I'm good to go. I did not need to do backward sled walks or even heavy leg extension isos or any split or iso split squat, iso lunge. I don't need to do anything. Just warm up, period. And you usually feel better. So I would look at it of like someone can do that light stuff, then you got to get heavy isometrics so you can get the muscle stronger. You can get the muscle stronger, muscle bigger, and you can strain the tendon. And then same thing with the heavy lifting. And heavy lifting, I would just address everything. Like I talk a lot about the quads, but everything does matter. So it's like you should be doing something for your calves, you should be doing something for your hamstrings, for your hips. One of the problems you get with when you get a knee pain is like, what are you going to do now? You're going to do quads. You're going to focus. If you do load, you're going to focus on quads. But what if you had a hip that was super strong? What if you were a hip dominant jumper and now you've just neglected your hips in rehab for the last 2 months? What's going to happen when you go back to jumping? Now your hips cannot take the load that they could take before. So you need to make sure that you're staying up on the strength of everything else around the area. So the heavy lifting like squats, RDL, split squats, those type of exercises, get super strong with those. And this whole I've really questioned myself recently because I love back squats and front squats and Zercher squats. I love those exercises. But I'm like, if we want to get really strong quads, and get a lot of strength, get a lot of load through the patellar tendon, I bet you like a leg press would be better. I bet you like a belt squat would be better. You know, something where you're not limited by the balance. You're not limited by the type of exercise, like a front squat, back squat. There's other limitations there. And I look at like the leg extension, for example, and I'm in love with the leg extension. I'm sure people out there hate them still because they say they're not functional or your feet aren't on the ground and you're not co-activating everything else. And I'm like, I love leg extensions. Amazing way to get the most load possible through your quad and patellar tendon. So I think you could look at lifting. You might be able to look at lifting that way and be like, if we're doing a squat exercise, let's find a way where we can load it as heavy as possible. We can tolerate it without all the other negatives of like, I can't balance with a back squat or my leverages aren't good for it or something like that. So, but that's, you know what, people might, maybe it'll help with the rehab. Maybe some people don't need it. Again, it depends where they're at. If I say, let's do a super heavy belt squat and your patellar tendon and quads just can't handle it, you're going to get more pain. So that's probably where like that, doing this, getting strong with the front squat or the back squat, all this stuff could be good because a lot of the super heavy stuff that we love for tendons, there's a lot of people's tendons can't handle it. So if you do the lighter stuff, now they can handle it, then you can progress slowly. So, but I think the biggest phase where you're saying these kids should get back into sport, I think the most important thing is that I look at stage 3, store and release phase. So that's progressing back into, for patellar tendon, jumping, landing, change in direction, XL, decel, progressing back into that. That is the most important. And we strength coaches, like we get everything out of the weight. We love the weight room, so it's like we could completely neglect that type of training, and that training probably isn't very fun either because it's closed areas. You're making sure that you're able to bend your knees and move from side to side and whatever. And a lot of kids, I mean, they might not just not want to do that because it's not very fun. It's not as attractive as you have got better on a squat or you've got more weight on this. But that's the most important, is progressing that. And that needs to go with like just finding ways to load the patellar tendon less and then progressing slowly. So for example, you could start like a squat early on in jumping, early on when you're just getting back into jumping, you could do like a squat jump, like at 50% intensity, you know, for like 3 sets of 10 or something. And then the thing is, the tendon always tells you. So you wake up the next day after you did that. Okay, how do I feel? Do I have an increase in pain? You got an increase in pain, you got to scale back. Maybe you couldn't handle it. Maybe you got to jump at 25%. But most cases, people can handle it. And then you progress that jump into maybe now you can do a 75% jump. And then you can do a 100% jump the next session. And then you could transition that into an approach jump where you're actually planning and then jumping, because that's more load on your tendon than it is to just stand there. And then same thing with like change of direction is like if you're doing a 45-degree cut, that's lower load than a 90-degree cut, probably lower load than like a 180-degree cut. So just progressing those in that manner. And I guess I made my program Jump Knee protocol in a way where it's like I attempted to progress everything like that, all those qualities of jumping, landing, change of direction, excel, decel, progress them from lower intensity to higher intensity. Because you can't just go from my patellar tendon hurts, I did the super heavy isos, I got super strong in the weight room, I'm going back to sport. You can't just go back to sport. That's way too big of a gap. You have to progress those things that matter the most. And I think, not to knock on ATG or knees or toes, because I think the program, it clearly does help a ton of people. But I think it kind of, for a tendon, I think it would do it. I think it's doing a disservice if that stage 3 is not addressed. Because in my experience, I don't know what the program even looks like or what people are doing now, but in my experience, kids have told me they do all the lifting stuff, then they just are given the advice, go back to sports. And it's like, that is not good advice. You have to progress going back into sports. Sport is one thing, weight room is one thing, and there is a huge gap between the two that people need to be addressing. Probably the same for Achilles. I do a little bit of research into Achilles, but not as much. But I bet you Achilles would kind of be the same.
Yeah, 100%. I think that gap between injury and full sport is still underserved, and it's something that we're both passionate about as well. I think just plugging those gaps and putting in some stepping stones, because like you say, even if you've got a really heavy split squat isometric, that doesn't replicate the demands of running into a slam dunk. So you've got to put some smaller steps.
Yeah, and it's poking the bear. You're like, I've spent 3 months getting super strong in the weight room, and then it's like, I'm going back to sport, and you pissed it off again, and you poke the bear. And now what? Now do you have weeks and months of a flare up? You could you could have a flare up that lasts you for 3 months. Think of all that work you did in the weight room, and you just got a massive flare up, and now you're out of the game for 3 months because you went and did a random sport session. Oh man. Now these are probably what we're talking about are probably the chronic difficult cases, because I'm convinced most people have had tendon pain in their life, and they just rest a little bit and it goes away and they're good. That's I can't imagine a time for me, but I bet you playing basketball in high school, I bet you I had jumper's knee for a day or two, and then I just rested a tiny bit and it went away. Didn't need any loading. So this is another thing with the tendon rehab is you have the tendinopathy continuum. Craig Purdom, Joe Cook put this out a while ago, where it's like you have a normal tendon, then you have a reactive tendon, and then at the bottom you have degenerative tendon. So what we're talking about is the degenerative long-term tendon. But a lot of people can just do a little bit too much load and they get a reactive tendon. You don't need to do any loading. You just got to give it a little bit of a break, and then it goes back to a normal tendon. That's their idea, at least. And if we look at the structure, they think that when you have a reactive tendon, you have actually not damaged the collagens. You just damaged the interfascicular matrix, the gel around the fascicles. You've just damaged that area. And the benefit there is there's a ton of cells there. There's a ton of activity there. So that thing recovers like super fast, and you don't need to do any loading. It just recovers like that, and you're good to go back to sports. So, but this talk, I'm not saying this talk is like misguided, because anyone who would listen to a tendon talk has a chronic tendon pain. Nobody with a short-term tendon pain is listening to a tendon talk. The short-term tendon pains just go away. It's the people that have dealt with them for years that is like, yeah, that's not reactive anymore. Like, you have tapped into some collagen, you probably have some degeneration, and that's probably what's going on.
That just got me thinking about, like, especially when you was younger, so you probably did have your jumper's knees and that you probably just got on with it and did other stuff, right? And because just as you know, you're younger and you're a lot more robust, you probably thought, I'm just going to work around it. So you did everything that was pain-free, which again is going to help promote blood flow to the area anyway, and it is going to help rest it to some degree. So you just touched on it there, but I've always been curious, because what is the difference between tendonitis and tendinopathy? So because obviously this comes up a lot, and everyone, you tend to hear those two terms. What is the difference?
Yeah, so I guess back in the day, they probably the earliest, they called it tendonitis, which would be the itis is inflammation. So they just thought it was an inflammatory tendon that's what's causing pain. And then they shifted to tendinosis, which was, they think that pain is from degeneration of collagen. And then they shifted to tendinopathy, which was, it's probably some inflammation, it's probably some degeneration, and we don't really know. So they just say tendinopathy is like a encompassing thing, because they don't really know what's going on. Right. But this has kind of actually influenced people to say there's no inflammation. Inflammation is not a factor in tendon. And actually, this still exists today, where people, and I probably did this 2 years ago, but I've done a lot more digging to say that you can't say that. But the people will say it's tendinopathy, it's not inflammation. Inflammation is not a player, but inflammation is a player. There's a guy, Neil Miller, Stephanie Dakin, I think, two researchers. They have a YouTube video talking about inflammation, and they have pieces of research too on inflammation. There's a ton of inflammatory markers going on when you have tendon pain, and if you the problem is when you treat it as a tendinitis, as an inflammatory thing, you take NSAIDs and you ice it and you rest it, which is probably not good. And Stephanie Dakin is like, when you have the inflammation, it's your body's resolution that you want to get after. So it's like you want your body to go in and resolve it itself. You don't want to be taking these other things to resolve it for you. But yeah, you do have inflammation going on. It's like, so I just say tendinopathy, but there is some itis and there is some osis probably. But it's probably not just one or the other. I would think to even, it's a little bit more nuanced. I would say the reactive tendon, the short-term tendons, that's probably the itis cases. That's probably like the inflammatory cases where you rest it a little bit and it goes away. Yeah. But when you get into long-term, that's probably more osis, like the degeneration. And the long-term chronic thing, the degeneration sucks because if you look at a muscle, most muscles are red. They get a lot of blood flow. Tendons are white, and tendons hardly get any blood flow. So when you do get degeneration, if you think you can even heal that area of degeneration, it's going to take a long time. But the idea is the tendon grows bigger and bigger. It lays down more collagen. So that process takes a long time too. That takes months. It could take years of you just kind of like letting it happen. I don't know what else you can do, but let it happen. And again, I don't really know how that laying down collagen happens, because by the time, just think of yourself by the time you're done maturing. Like your bones aren't growing any longer. Your bones aren't growing any longer. Your muscles aren't changing that much. You can make them bigger. But I'm looking at the tendon fascicles, and I'm like, you probably have a set number of fascicles. So what's happening? Are you actually growing another fascicle, or are you just like laying down more collagen over the area that has been injured? What exactly is happening? But I do know that tendons, although they are super white and they don't get much blood flow, not much activity, they do have a healing process. This was something that Karen Sobernago, she's the Achilles researcher, she said, I couldn't find this quote. I loved it though. She said, tendons don't have poor healing capacity. They just have a slow healing capacity, or something along those lines. Just because it's slow doesn't mean it's poor, but it is happening. It's just slow, and you have to be patient.
Have you got any advice for people who might be going through that process? Because it is, I think, a frustrating process to be rehabbing a tendon. How do you show, I think in other types of strength, it's quite easy to reflect on your progress. Like you can say your squat, you've added 20 kilos to it over time. It's very easy to see you're making progress. What are some ways that people can reflect back on the last few weeks or months? Heavier, longer ISOs would be an obvious one. But if we go more to the plyometric dynamic stuff, how do you show yourself that your tendon is getting thicker and stronger, that it is working?
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know if it is getting thicker and stronger, and if that's what's helping, because you never, unless you're getting that thing imaged like weekly, then I guess you never really know. And the weird thing with the tendon thickness and is you can get a thicker tendon by just it getting fluid accumulation, because you could have whenever you really blow up your tendon, like I blew up my Achilles tendon after I sprained. I'll answer your question, but I'll just a side story. I sprained my right ankle, the worst one I've ever done. I shot a 3-pointer, landed on a guy's foot. He closed out underneath me. He was like a farmer. He's like a farmer guy playing basketball. These guys don't know where to be on the court. They don't know their spacing. So I land on the guy's foot, and I go down, and I'm thinking I could stand up, and I was like, no, I can't. And I couldn't walk for like 2 weeks. I went to the hospital, got X-ray. It was fine, but it was the slowest ankle rehab ever. And then I went back into one day. I just playing ball with my friends, and I felt good, and I'm like, I'm going to dunk again. So I dunked a right-left dunk. I usually do left-right. I'm a two-leg jumper, the plant legs. I usually do left-right, and then I dunk. I did right-left because my right ankle was still bad, and I couldn't dorsiflex off of it. I did 3 dunks. The next day, my left Achilles tendon was huge. It was red. It was hot. This is a reactive tendon.
Yeah.
I couldn't even really walk. I couldn't walk on that thing for like a few days. I went for a super long walk, like a weekend around a lake, and I had like old ladies being like, "You look like you're in pain." It's like I am. I can hardly walk just from doing 3 dunks. It's like how much I've fallen off. But The your question was, sorry, what was even your question? It was on,
How can
people
people
how
show
they
themselves
can
that
feel
they're
like they're
progressing?
progressing. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, okay. So I think this is where you have to start with the end in mind, and you probably have to keep some very difficult early on. But what does the person want to do? They want to play basketball. Like if I'm working with a basketball player, they want to play basketball. And I think when you rehab someone, you don't even think about that. It's like, okay, time to rehab. You're now a rehab athlete. You're no longer a basketball athlete. You're a rehab athlete. And what athlete wants to rehab? They want to play basketball. Um, this is the hardest thing to get in people's heads. I when I talk to people who have jumper's knee and they've had it chronically, it's like whenever I tell them the goal is for you to go and play basketball and not think about your patellar tendon anymore. And for them, it's like, dude, exactly. It's like, well, you should be thinking this way, but I guess if you've had it for the last 3 years, why would you think that it would just go away? You're going to think you're going to have this the rest of your life. But that's the goal, is for you to get back to basketball and not think about it anymore. So I think in the rehab process, you're going to lose people if you never keep any type of sport in there. You never keep, you know what I mean? You never keep
Yeah.
anything maybe with the basketball. And it's hard early on. It's very hard early on. But I'm like, if someone has a bad patellar tendon, and they got to do all the isos, and maybe they hate doing isos. They got to do leg extension, split squat. They got to do some. What we didn't talk about in the show so far is the Achilles, the calf, and the Achilles for the jumper's knee, which is crazy important. If you don't have good hopping with your Achilles and your calf, if you can't like disperse a lot of load, get good loading through those areas, it's just going to go up to your knee. So that's kind of one thing I wanted to say, is that there needs to be some progression for you and your hopping ability. Your hopping ability is your calf, your Achilles. That has to work super well for you to rehab back in the sport. That's one thing people really miss. So they need to progress back into that. But anyways, let's go back to you need to keep some level of sport. And so what I say when someone's doing stage 1 isometrics, if they're a basketball player, first of all, you got to quit playing basketball. You got to quit jumping if it's really bad pain. You just got to quit all those things. You're just pissing it off again. But you can do anything that doesn't cause an increased pain response. So that could be shooting free throws, or that could be taking really easy jumpers. And you should be doing that. Go and do that as much as you want, to keep some sort of sport in there, because you don't want to completely remove it. And now you're just a rehab person. And I've seen when you look at like at college level, you look at, because I'm a male myself. I have an ego. I remember when I was 18 years old. You look at these guys who are like super good basketball players, and then they get injured, and they got to go do rehab in the training room, and it's like their testosterone is at zero, like their drive is at zero. You've completely removed all the things that are good about this athlete. It's gone now, because now they're rehabbing with therabands, and it's like their identity is just crushed. So it's like in the rehab process, if you could find some way to keep the sport in, keep some dopamine level in where they're getting some competition. And this is where like spike ball, like I love playing the sport of spike ball. If you can handle it, it's pretty low load on the patellar tendon, but it gets you that competitive type feeling. So what I would say for someone to look at their rehab process and feel like I'm making progress is, first of all, keep some level of sport in there, so you're kind of giving them what they want, which is being able to play the sport. But you got to look at first of all, pain. You're obviously going to be paying attention to pain, so I don't even want to say that. You're going to make sure that pain is at an acceptable level and pain is stable. You never want to spike pain. You just want to keep it stable. Now, for that person, if they want to get to a 0 out of 10 and they're acceptable as like a 3 out of 10, it's like, I don't know if that's going to happen. That's probably going to happen, but it might take a few months or years for you to get to a 0 out of 10. So let's just stop being soft and deal with a 3 out of 10, you know? But so pain, you're going to pay attention to pain, but I think it's function. For someone to feel like their rehab process is making progress, you have to be keeping tabs on their function. And their function could be early on, let's look at your quads. That's a soupy quad. That quad is like half the size of that quad. So it's like, well, let's work on that. And then maybe that's going to take a while, though, to see that increase. But you could do the strength thing, too, and say, let's keep track. Day 1, you're doing 50-pound holds. And strength, because of the neurological gains and the brain deficit of a tendon pain, strength is going to bump up immediately. So it's like for someone to feel like they're making progress in the ISO stage, super easy. You're going to gain so much strength because you come in so weak, your brain has shut things down. You've just regained the neural. It's like those kids that just get into lifting. All those adaptations initially are neurological. They're not strength. It's the same thing with pain. Pain has destroyed your neurology, and now you're just getting the neurology back, and your strength is going to be way up there. Then the thing is, in like stage 2, lifting, you just look at lifting numbers, people are progressing there. And then we get stage 3, you could probably film the people and film them, and they're moving like Jill Cook says, hopping like a duck, whatever that could imagine for you. But you could look at the way that they're moving, the way that they're functioning, and it's probably going to be very stiff, like very poor early on. And you just film that thing, and then week after week is like, hey, remember when you're moving like this? Now you're moving like this, Or you were running at 50%, now you're running at 75%. You're running at 75, now you're running at 100. So I think it's a great question. Is keeping someone engaged in the rehab, making them feel like they're making progress. And it's like ISOs, you're going to gain so much strength, and you're going to see the size come back. Lifting, same thing. And actually, the benefit of patellar tendon pain, a lot of people never lift. So they come into lifting, and it's like they're going to see huge gains in the lifting numbers and be like, dude, I'm getting so strong. It's like, well, I could make anyone strong because you have never touched a weight in your life. But then it's the stage 3 is, man, it's getting them back to look at how they're moving and making sure that it's getting better. And then the thing with stage 4, the stage 4 return to sport, Dave O'Sullivan, he took this quote from some guy. He said he wants thoughtless, fearless movement. And I think that's something that a rehab client should have in their head, that this is, again, going back to, I talked to a kid who's had jumpers knee for 3 years, and I'm like, the goal is for you to play basketball and not think about the thing. That is thoughtless, fearless movement. And in the stage 4, because you think of everything that they've done in rehab, nothing is thoughtless, nothing is fearless, everything is thoughtless, and everything is fearless when you're doing ISOs and you're doing the lifting and you're thinking of everything. So it's like, let's go back and give you something where you're not thinking about your knee. And that's where I said spike ball. Spike ball could be the thing, because spike ball, you can, if you're thinking about your knee and spike ball, no one's going to want to play with you because you're going to be losing. But it's stuff like that. And dude, I've had it when my patellar tendon gets really bad, really stiff. It really, man, you feel, you lose drive, and maybe it's testosterone. I don't know what it is. Dopamine. You don't want to do anything. It's like you might spend 1 hour during the day rehabbing, and then the rest of the day, what are you doing? You're probably moving around a lot less than you were otherwise. I think they've seen this with patellofemoral pain. It's patellofemoral pain people, their daily movement, daily steps is way down compared to people who with healthy knees. Because when you have pain, you don't really want to move. Yeah. But when you don't move, that's terrible. That's terrible for everything. And when you just go for a walk or something, when you go for a walk, you don't have to think about your pain. When you go for a walk, you can just go walk. When you go for a hike, you can just go hike. So it's finding things in life where you don't have to think about your pain, because you're going to be thinking about your pain 24/7. Find something where you're not thinking about your pain, and make sure it's not poking the bear. But I think this is the magic that goes on in rehab is I just lay out this whole process of rehab, but I'm like, I still don't know why people get better. I don't know the mechanism why people get better. So to throw something like that and be like, I'm so laissez-faire I've always been a laissez-faire coach. That's just me. But I'm like, dude, make sure the rehab is legit. Make sure you're not poking the bear. But the more you can expose yourself to things where you're not getting pain responses, expose yourself to spike ball, going on hikes, doing something outside the ordinary. Your body is probably finding some way to resolve your pain, and I have no clue how that's happening. But it's like you're going into the arena by doing all these different things instead of laying in bed. What do you think is going to happen laying in bed and rehabbing for 1 hour a day? So just I don't know what it is. Is it that you're moving more and now your insulin sensitivity is better? Your tendon is not getting sugar cross links. Your interfascicular matrix is not unhealthy because of the chronic blood sugar. I don't know what's going on, but I think the more that you move around, the more different things you try where you're not thinking about your knee, that's huge. And I put that in the end of my jumper's knee protocol. I'm like, make sure you get 10,000 steps per day. I was just like, just do it. Just do it. It's done. I can't tell you exactly why, but I think you need to be doing that.
What I think is really important there about what you said is that making sure you had that clear journey of where you're going to, because when you are injured and you are in that state of just like, fuck, when am I going to get better? This is awful. And all you think about is that discomfort. And you think about all the things you can't do. You're not looking at all the things that you can do. And then by having that plan is in saying, cool, okay, this is where I want to get back to. These are the steps. Let me try and find some wins along the way. As you said, like getting stronger at the isometrics, getting stronger at your big movements, then taking yourself back outside, distracting yourself with other movements that's maybe similar but not quite the same, and just building up to that specificity level of back to return to sport is massive. Because like, I think for me, one of the ones that I love there, what you said, spike ball's great, but then also the bit of like going for hikes because of like the different type of terrains and stuff like that. You're actively thinking about, where's my foot going, like where's this going? So you're just walking around. So you're not thinking about, oh, is this going to hurt? I don't want to slip and die. It's like I'm kind of going to walk through all these different places. So you're distracted and you're getting into a different state of flow. It's nice. It's really cool.
Yeah, dude, I wish we had some research on the caveman back in the day. Did the caveman get jumper's knee? Because I'm like, the caveman gets jumper's knee. His jumper's knee is going to get better because he is 18 hours a day. He's got to be moving around, and I think it's the magic of moving around. Where maybe, I mean, you see animals get injured and they have a chronic limp forever. So maybe that's like a maladaptation. Maybe you don't want that depending on the injury. But I'm like, caveman gets jumper's knee. He's probably not going to jump for a very long time, but he's still going to be moving. And I bet you that his body just figures out a way for him to keep moving. Yeah. His body figures out a way to adapt. And I think this idea of when you create compensations or maladaptations, like we're doing that with everything that we do. We always have compensations and maladaptations. It's just finding ones that aren't going to be negative where you have a chronic limp. Finding the obvious ones that you need to address is like, for example, you have compensations, maladaptations. That's not to say that like you can get away with anything, because it's like, okay, your quad is soupy, you got to work on your quad strength. That is a compensation, a maladaptation. That's bad. That's a very bad thing. We need to address all the things we know we need to address. But it's like there are probably some things that are just never going to go away, and you move the way that you move, and you move that way your entire life. So if you're like, for example, you're a knee dominant guy, and then it's like you develop patellar tendon pain. Well, it's because you're knee dominant. Well, you don't really know that. That's just the way that this person is. So maybe we leave that alone. And the weird thing with pain and rehab is like you only do as much as you need to do so that athlete can go and play. And how many things, like I love the phrase, how many stones did we not turn over in the rehab process? We probably did not turn over hundreds of stones because they just got better and they went and played. It's crazy to look at rehab processes. I've seen it. Seeing it at the college level is like the kid goes from high-level basketball and then they're going in a training room and they're doing super low-level stuff. Maybe they're coming to me doing really low-level stuff, and then you just throw them back out into the wolves. You throw them back into sport, and it's like, there you go. And actually, the weird thing is, most times it actually works itself out. It actually works itself out. It's crazy. So, all these things that you're not addressing, like you think that this compensation is bad or this maladaptation is bad, and you never get around to addressing it because the athlete just gets better enough and they get back to sport. It's like you basically you're shooting in the dark, and you're like, let's just find all these little things. That's kind of what I think. But at the same time, I look at the very obvious things. Look at the super obvious things. Your quad needs to get stronger. When I make you hop on one leg, you can't even hop on one leg. This is so obvious. Let's just address this thing, and then let's progress from there. But there are thousands of things that I could have been like, well, are you getting enough protein per day? You know, and maybe I never brought that up, and they just got better.
Yeah, totally. I always say good enough is good enough. And at the end of the day, if you look hard enough for things that are wrong, you're going to find plenty of things that are not ideal. But you said it perfectly in that once they're ready enough to go back to sport, then they're ready enough to go back to sport. You don't need to clean up every single detail that might be suboptimal. As long as the big rocks are in the jar, then they're going to be fine playing their sport, and it'll become obvious if they're not, and then you can address the ones that do turn up.
Dude, and you guys probably had people like clients like this too, where everything for them, they're like the overthinkers, and everything is a problem. Yeah, they have a list of 250 things they need to address, and I'm like, no. And it's like, I don't have any time to deal with that stuff. It's just like, dude, I know better than you. Listen to me. You're being neurotic. Just stop. You don't need to address all these things. So it always depends, man. It's like everyone is so different. Like I opened up a phone consultation, so I talk with people with patellar tendon pain, and people are always looking for some like universal rules of, and I guess I give some universal rules: the quad strength, the function, the pain. But it's like, I don't know. You got to tell me your story, because I could have someone with the most strength in the world, a power lifter with the most strength in the world, and they got bad patellar tendon pain. And it's like, I ain't going to talk about quad strength with that guy. You know, it's like there's always this. I think it's the phrase of what's missing. You hear someone's story, and it's like, what is missing in your rehab? And it's usually obvious. It's usually so obvious. And if we're competitive, dopamine dominant men, our egos get in the way where we think we're not even aware of it. We're not even aware of the most obvious thing that we're missing, because it's like, nah, I know better. I'm good. I can get through it.
Totally. Jake, thank you so much. We've run a little bit over, so I don't want you to be late for your next appointment. But where can people find out more about you? Give us your links and resources, please.
Yeah, it's Instagram mostly, Jake Tuura, last name Tuura, and then my website's Jacked Athlete. Yeah, dude. Recently, I've just been posting. I've just been mostly every day, whether I'm reading a new piece of tendon, things that are interesting with tendons, or I just go on a walk and I think of something new with tendons, and I just kind of post it on my story. And probably in usually the next week, I look back and I'm like, well, that was wrong. But it's fun, man. It's fun. And I hope within the next year or a few months, I get this new tendon course done. It's just going to be on patellar tendon. I might do one on Achilles tendon, but it's getting all this. It's just getting this understanding of what's going on with tendons, because people throw out phrases of tendon stiffness, tendon strength, and I'm like, none of you have any clue what you're talking about. Doesn't mean you can't get people better at sports and better at rehab. You can do that, but when you start throwing out these phrases and try to find a mechanism for why things happening, I think that's where you get in trouble. So oftentimes it's just like, did it work? Yes, it worked. Well, then good. And leave the science for the people that want to go deep into the science.
Awesome.
But yeah, thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jake, for coming on. Thoroughly enjoyed that episode. Really did appreciate your time. Fascinating hearing those stories. And like, also, I think the fact that you've gone from so many different like modalities of training, you know, going from like the bodybuilding style training into like the vertical, well, from vertical jump to stuff to the bodybuilding, and obviously going back to basketball. I love that, because at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with all this moving around, and it's just following what you actually want to do, and that should be made more normal. But guys, we really hope you did enjoy today's episode as much as we did. If you did, please do share on your social media channels. Don't forget to tag us and Jake on those stories. And if you would like to leave us a review, or you want to support the podcast, head over to YouTube and give us a cheeky subscribe. But as always, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.